Good morning from the Buttonwood Park Zoo in Massachusetts. We have a sunny, beautiful day here today, and we are coming to you live from our Charlie's Nature Play space. So for those of you who have visited us before, you know that normally on a day like today, we would have lots of kids running around, using their imaginations, getting dirty. If you're following our Nature Connection activities, actually today focuses on the climb area over there. So we're hoping you guys will all get outside and pretend you're in Charlie's Nature Play with us, climbing on all the things you can find as long as your family is comfortable with it. We are glad you're joining us today. We are here every day at 11 o'clock for our virtual keeper chats, and today I am joined by one of our educators, Sarah, as well as one of our animal ambassadors. So I'm going to let her introduce you to Tilly, and then we will take your questions after she's told us a little bit about them.
Hi everyone, this is Tilly, and Tilly is our eastern box turtle. Eastern box turtles are a really cool animal. They're found all over the eastern part of the United States of America. And she is especially cool because even though she's really tiny, Tilly here is 17 years old. So she's small but mighty, and this is about as big as you'll find the eastern box turtles in your area if you live in the eastern United States. So there goes Molly. If you paid attention to her keeper chat, you can hear her howling. All right, so if we look at Tilly, she's very, very cool, and the reason that I want you to take a close look is because if you are getting some nice fresh air today or any day in the future, there's a chance that you'll actually find an eastern box turtle, because right now they are starting to wake up. So reptiles go through something if they live in a cold place called brumation. It's like the cold-blooded version of hibernation. And when it gets cold, their whole body slows down. So they find a nice warm place to stay, and they start waking up in late March or early April. So just right around now. So if you start going for hikes in areas that are near ponds or lakes, anywhere that's got that nice vegetation right on the edge of some water, you actually might stumble upon an eastern box turtle just like Tilly. So she's got a lot of really cool adaptations as she runs away from me. You can see that she's actually a little faster than a lot of people think when they think about turtles. And that's because she's got these really cool feet. I'm gonna try and give you a nice close-up. You can see that they're slightly webbed and they have those really nice claws, which makes her really good at getting around land, as well as actually doing pretty well in some shallow water, which is convenient for her. Not only because laying in water is one way for her to keep hydrated, but also she's not too shabby when it comes to catching animals that are going to live in and around the water, including but not limited to fish and worms and insects and all sorts of great things like that. So I can keep talking on and on. If you have any questions, chime in.
We have definitely had some questions come in. Let's see. Is it a freshwater or saltwater turtle?
That's a great question. So Tilly is going to be a freshwater turtle. So you'll be looking around ponds or streams or lakes, and that's where you'll find her. They're not going to spend too much time in the ocean, even though they can be found around some sand dune type places.
And these guys don't spend a ton of time in the water compared to like a slider or something like that.
Definitely not. These guys do spend most of their time on land. But actually, when they're much younger, they do spend a lot more time in water. So they move more to the land as they get older. And they're fully matured at around 5 years old. So those first 5 years, they're going to spend a lot more time in water than they do as adults.
Tilly is on the move. Jacob, age 6, wants to know, what do they do when they get scared?
Hi, Jacob. That is one of my very favorite questions you could ask about a box turtle, because box turtles get their name for exactly this. So I'm gonna pick Tilly up for a second and show you the box turtle's defining trait. And that is on the bottom of her shell. This is called the plastron. And you can see it's got this hinge right here. Now I've never seen Tilly do it, which is great because that means she's never been super, super scared. But they can actually pull all their arms, legs, head, tail, everything inside their shell, and they can close it completely. That's how they get the name box turtles. They can close up like a box. And they do that so well that it's said that you can't even pry it open with tools. They're super locked in there. So if she gets scared, she can close her whole body in and she doesn't have to worry about much of anything.
And box turtles are a group of turtles, so there are other types of box turtles, right? Like Asian box turtles.
There are. Well,
they
actually,
all can
box
do that?
turtles are exclusive to North America.
Oh, okay.
There are kinds of box turtles, but each kind has subspecies. So what we're looking at here, the eastern box turtle, is one of 6 subspecies of the common box turtle. So the eastern box turtle has the largest range in America of any box turtles, And it's going to be all the way from southern Maine to northern Florida and all the way towards literally the middle of the country. So even things like Kentucky, Tennessee, all that good stuff, even found in Texas occasionally.
All right, Piper and Peyton, age 12, want to know, are they related to tortoises?
Welcome back, Piper and Peyton. Absolutely, they are related to tortoises, although not as closely related as they are to some of our other smaller turtles that are still gonna spend some time in water. They are sometimes known as box tortoises. It's not quite accurate, but because they do have those bumpier legs and they do spend a lot of time on land, it is a good question because they definitely seem kind of tortoise-like. We're trying to move her back towards her diet.
Speaking of which, Kaiden, age 9, wants to know what they eat.
Hi, Kaiden. They are going to eat a bunch of different things. They are opportunistic omnivores, which means that if they find it, they'll pretty much try it. When they're younger, so like I said, between like 1 and 5, they're going to spend more time in water, and that's because they need to grow very quickly if they're going to avoid being eaten. So they're going to eat mostly meat, insects, worms, fish, small frogs or frog eggs, all sorts of things like that. They'll even eat carrion or dead animals occasionally. And then as they get older than 5, they'll move more on land and they'll start to eat more fungi or plants, berries, vegetables, grasses, and they'll eat more plant life from that point on. So right now, Tilly has a diet here at the zoo of mostly fruits, vegetables, and insects. So actually, as we walk back towards her diet, hopefully she'll let you take a peek. She does love her fruits, and I know you love mango. She certainly has tried dried mango in her life and enjoyed it, so we've got a lot of yummy things for her.
Trying to keep her out of the shadow is what I'm trying to do.
She's making it tough.
Let's see.
So we can actually see I've got some Super Cal, which is a calcium-based vitamin for reptiles, on her diet, which has some reptile pellets. It's got some lettuce, some grapes, carrots, peppers, apples, and a whole bunch of worms, mealworms, superworms, and waxworms. Oh, bud, come on. Let's see if you would like any of our worm friends, or are you just too excited?
Peyton and Piper, age 12, want to know if she can jump.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. I would love to see her jump. Unfortunately, based on that big shell, it's gonna really stop her from doing any kind of jumping motion because she can't really push off. If you look at this leg especially, you can see that it's basically extended as far out as it can go, so she's not gonna get any good push. That said, if she were in a crisis, she'd probably be able to push up pretty hard, but not to jump like another animal might.
All right, my friend Teddy in New York, age 5. Hi, Teddy and Brian.
Hi, Teddy and Brian.
They're wondering, they see his neck moving. Is he breathing, or what's happening with that?
Excellent. So some of it is that he's breathing, or that she's breathing, but another really cool thing about this sort of turtle, and tortoises as well, is they have all this extra skin around their neck. And what that's going to do is let them stretch their neck out really far if they want to reach something without actually moving their body. So you'll see the throat is moving as she breathes, but also it's very obvious because that skin is really flapped up. So it makes the breathing more noticeable than, say, when we breathe.
Excellent. What is her best sense?
Her best sense, believe it or not, I would probably say that touch is one of her best senses. Reptile scales are really sensitive, so they have a really good sense. So if I were to like touch her back leg here, she can definitely feel it all. She is prioritizing worms at the moment. She can actually sense me touching her shell too, but what that's gonna feel like is if somebody touched your fingernail. The shell and our fingernail are both made out of keratin, and so she can feel it, not necessarily as much as she feels on her skin, but she can definitely feel that pressure. She also, though, does have a great sense of smell, so it's worth putting that out there too. That's how she can find all of her food.
Amari, age 7, wants to know if she has favorite things to do.
Favorite things to do? She loves burrowing and hiding in corners. That's one of her favorite, and that's a great turtle skill, burrowing, because especially around here where it gets pretty chilly in the winter and fall, it's going to be really important for her to keep her body temperature the right degree. So because she's cold-blooded, she can't warm herself up or cool herself down unless she's actually changing her environment. So she's really good at burrowing. When turtles like this burrow, it's called making a form. And so she's good at kind of getting a little hole and getting herself nice and snug in there, so she's super comfy. That's one of her awesome skills.
Great. Lucas, age 8, the nature activity for today is climbing. Is she a good climber?
Oh man, I love that question. Unfortunately, she's not quite as good a climber as some of our other animal friends here at the zoo, but because she has those cool little claws, she's actually better at getting traction than some other turtles. So she's not as bad as some of her cousins, but it's not her biggest strength. She could probably get up some kind of, not too steep slopes, but not much more than that. Certainly couldn't climb a tree, unfortunately.
Let's see. Can you just remind, Tegan is just joining us, who we're meeting, her name, a little bit about her story?
Absolutely. I would
How
love
old is
to.
she?
So this is Tilly, and Tilly turned 17, believe it or not, in February this year. And she has actually been with us for 11 years. So she came to us from Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife in Cape Cod, and they actually had her basically from when she was incredibly, incredibly young. And our best guess as to what happened is that somebody found her in the winter and brought her to Fish and Wildlife Services, which on the one hand was a very sweet gesture, but on the other hand, it's very important for you to remember that Tilly is an eastern box turtle, and in the state of Massachusetts, as well as many other states, they are vulnerable and they are considered a species of special concern. So interfering with them and definitely taking them from their homes is actually illegal. So I can't stress this enough. As amazing as it is to see them in the wild, we need to leave them in the wild. So we think somebody thought they were rescuing her, brought her in, and because of that, she was no longer releasable. And so she's had to be in captivity since then. So it's kind of a sad story, but awesome because it means that she gets to come and live with us. And we certainly love having her.
All right. What is their predator in the wild?
That's a fantastic question. So they have a few predators when they're very young, but because their shells are so incredible and can close up so well, they actually have almost no predators as adults. But when they're very young, their shell's not quite as hard, they're not as big, and especially when they're eggs, they can be eaten by even something as silly as like a chipmunk. Definitely things like raccoons, coyotes, wolves, things like that. Even birds of prey like small owls or hawks will definitely try. But once they get this nice hard shell, even though they're small, they become almost impossible to eat. So most things just stop trying. She's beautifully camouflaged, so she's hard to spot, and she's got a shell that makes it incredibly difficult to eat her. So she's a very cool species at avoiding predators.
You mentioned that she's eating superworms and mealworms. What is the difference between those?
What a
I don't know if you still
fantastic
have any
question.
left.
I do. I brought a fair amount. So I will get a superworm and a mealworm, and just for fun, a waxworm in my hands so you can see. So the mealworm is this little one, and mealworms are going to go through a metamorphosis and turn into a mealworm beetle at some point. You'll notice that the superworm looks very similar, but is much, much larger. That is the biggest difference. And they're also gonna go through a metamorphosis and turn into a superworm beetle. And then our waxworms are a little different. They're kind of gooey. I think they're kind of cute. And they're actually gonna go through a metamorphosis and turn into a moth. So all of these are the larval forms of their insects, and all of them are very delicious to eastern box turtles, as you can see.
How far do they walk? Do they have a pretty wide range?
That is a fantastic question. So it may seem silly and very, very small to you or to me, but to a very small eastern box turtle who's gonna max out at about 6 inches, their daily range is within 750 feet of where they start. They can go up to a mile, believe it or not, but they're really almost never gonna go out of that mile. And that's another reason it's super important for us to always leave these turtles where we find them, because if we move them, they're no longer able to find their way home. Eastern box turtles have an incredible homing instinct, so they can basically always find their way back home unless you take them out of their range. And then they will probably never find it. So it's kind of sad. It's a small range, but it is their home, and they will stay there basically their entire lives. So it's a really, really important thing to leave them there. Side note, if you ever see a turtle trying to cross a road, definitely help them, but always move them in the direction they're going. They can be very stubborn, and they do know where they're trying to get. So if you put them back where they came from, they will immediately try to cross the road again. So always be careful with that. Hey, bud.
Chloe, age 9, thank you for pointing out. We will make sure none of the worms get away into the grass, but when we're done, I promise we won't let any
We'll
escape.
clean them all up.
And Tilly's pretty good about not letting them.
I was gonna say
disappear.
she's doing her best work to try and help you with that.
Tegan is wondering if they're good diggers.
Oh yes, they're awesome diggers. If you look at these claws, they've got 5 on their front feet and actually 4 on their back, and they use those to make those forms I was talking about before. So they'll dig little burrows either just at night or if they get too hot, all that good stuff. But they also have to dig really good forms for the winter. they're gonna start brumation, which again is like the reptile version of hibernation, in around October even. And so they have to dig a really nice place and they have to burrow into it, and they're gonna stay there for months. They don't really start coming out until March or April. So they have to make sure that that form or that burrow is really, really nicely dug, or they're just not gonna do great over the winter.
Great. Mason, age 4, wants to know if you can tell them if she's happy, mad, sad. Does she have moods?
She has moods, and we can usually tell them by her behavior. So some days she'll be a little bit of a stinker, and some days she's a lot more affectionate. But with reptiles, a lot of what they do has to be kind of minimal because, again, they are cold-blooded, so they don't have a ton of energy all the time. It's really based on what temperature they are. And so she's not going to play too much. It's mostly just based on where she positions herself, if she comes up to you or if she goes away from you. She can't really move her face much either, but some days she does have some really goofy behaviors. So I would say sometimes she's in a great mood and sometimes she's a little sassy.
All right. Sage, age 6, wants to know a little bit about how they have babies.
That is one of my favorite questions too, because it's really, really cool in eastern box turtles. So like I said, they'll start waking up for the spring in around March or April, and almost immediately they start looking for food and they start looking for a mate. Now they can mate basically throughout the entire season of spring, summer, and early fall, but it's gonna mostly be during this earlier part because most of the time eastern box turtles will lay their eggs between May and July. Now what's especially cool about this though is that a female eastern box turtle can mate, let's say this year, and she can lay that fertilized egg up to 4 years afterwards, which is a really cool thing that eastern box turtles and some other turtles can do. So that delayed fertilization is a really valuable tool to make sure that they can have their babies at the best time and make sure they're really successful. So they will lay eggs, they'll dig a nice little hole, they'll have usually between 2 and 8, but they can have as few as 1 or as many as 11 or 12, mostly like 4 or 5 eggs. And what's also awesome is that the temperature of those eggs is gonna determine if they're boys or girls. So if that nest is, let's say, get that one out of there. If that nest is between like 78 or 80 degrees, those eggs are gonna be mostly male. And if it's 82 degrees or up, they're gonna be mostly female. So it's a really interesting thing. So she will occasionally come back and check, make sure that her eggs are at a temperature where she'll have boys and girls, hopefully. But it is an interesting thought with things like climate change. What happens if all these eggs are too warm and we only have female reptiles? It's a cool thought.
And I think this is a great topic to give a little plug. Miss Sarah is putting together a pretty amazing virtual Spring Zoo Crew for everybody. So be on the lookout for information about that. This year's theme for Spring Zoo Crew is extreme parenting. So you're going to learn all about different parents in the wild animal kingdom. And we'll be giving you at-home activities to do every day. So definitely stay tuned for that. I have to give a plug. Miss Sarah has been working very hard on that. Jackson and Landon are wondering, is the only reason they go into their shell because of danger?
Pretty much. It's not super fun in there. It's pretty cramped. So they're really only going to go in there when they're really, really concerned for their own safety. And they'll stay in there as long as they have to. But if you can imagine having to pull your arms, legs, and head into a t-shirt and shorts and then stay there for a really long time, it's not going to be super comfortable. So they're really only going to do it when they're super worried.
It sounds like a fun activity to try later
there
at home.
There you go.
Maybe.
Try it out. See if you like it.
Sydney, age 11, wants to know if she gets flipped over on her back, can she flip back over?
I love that question. She can. It's not always super graceful, but she certainly doesn't like being on her back. It does make her a bit more vulnerable. That underside of her shell is not quite as hard as the top. Believe it or not, this top part of the shell is actually her ribs. They're not a rib cage, but her spinal cord is here on the inside of the shell, and the ribs grow out and are the basis of this top part of her shell. Now, because the bottom side, that plastron, doesn't have ribs in it, it's not quite as strong. So she's gonna be more vulnerable on her back. She can just kind of flail around until she flips over, or she'll try and push up against something else that'll give her a little leverage. But definitely she can, and she will definitely try to flip herself over as quickly as possible.
Claudia has a great question. I love this. I don't know if I've ever been asked this. Do turtles get wrinkles when they get older?
Yes, they do. But to be fair, they also are pretty wrinkly when they're younger, too. So their skin is specially designed to make sure that they can stretch and move really well. They can pull into their shell, but they can also stick out of their shell. So being wrinkly is a really great adaptation. But as they get a little bit bigger, you will notice them a bit more. As they get older, they stop growing at around 20 years old, and they can live to about 100 years old. So they will still be, growing and shedding. All reptiles shed their skin. So as they get new skin, you might see some more of those wrinkles come out with age. That's an awesome question. I love that. I haven't heard that either.
Teddy has another good question. How hard is his shell? Since we can't feel it.
That's a fantastic question. It's pretty tough. Like I said, it doesn't harden up completely until they reach maturity. But right now, I hate to say anything about breaking Tilly's shell. I certainly would never want that to happen. But it would be quite difficult to break this shell. In fact, there are stories of birds of prey dropping turtles to try and crack them open so they can eat them. And it is not an easy feat. So it's a very, very strong shell. That said, cars are one of the #1 threats to these kinds of turtles. So unfortunately, it's not hard enough to stand up to being run over by a car, but it can stand up to pretty much everything else.
All right, which is why it's really important this time of year to be really careful when you're driving around.
Definitely.
To look for turtles crossing the road. Chloe wants to know what a newborn turtle looks like.
Basically exactly the same, but much smaller. Which is pretty cute. So they have these very small eggs, and when they hatch, they come out as tiny little fresh, slightly squishier versions of the grown-ups. And as you can see, this is a very small turtle species, so they're not gonna change too much throughout their lives other than just kind of getting bigger. But they'll have the same patterns on their shell, the same kind of wrinkles, although maybe not as many. Basically the same overall shape. And she's trying to give you a close look. I wanna show you her eyes really quickly. Now, there are a bunch of different ways to tell eastern box turtles males from females. The eyes are one, although Tilly is a horrible example of this, because the males usually have red eyes and the females usually have yellow or brown eyes, but they can be a darkish red color as well, which is of course what Tilly's are. Luckily, they do something that is very good at telling us if they're boys or girls. Females will lay eggs, kind of like you might eat eggs for breakfast that don't have little chickens in them. They're unfertilized. Eastern box turtles can lay unfertilized eggs as well. And so when she lays eggs, that's a surefire way to know that she's a female. She knows them out of worms.
Yes. Do turtles take care of their babies?
That's a great question. Not particularly. This species has very little parental care. They might, like I said, come back to check if their form is the right temperature for their babies, or to make sure they haven't gotten eaten. But basically, once those baby turtles hatch, it's every turtle for themselves. And they don't really mature and start having their own babies. 5 at the earliest, but usually 7 or 8. And so they kind of just have to figure it out and go from there.
Oh, Wyatt is commenting he has a lizard at home that also eats mealworms.
Excellent.
Say hi to Bruin for me, Wyatt. Let's see, we've got any more questions. Oh, Juliana, age 8, has a good question. Would this make a good pet?
Well, as I said before, unfortunately in the state of Massachusetts, these turtles are considered a species of special concern, so having one as a pet is actually illegal. That said, you could argue that turtles make excellent pets. They're just kind of difficult to have, especially the ones that do go into hibernation. You have to make sure they have the right temperature, the right humidity, the right substrate or ground material to dig properly. And if you're gonna keep them outside, you have to make sure that they can get to the temperature they need to survive. Unfortunately, some people who try to get pet turtles will have them pass away only days after getting them because all of those things need to be basically perfect. Eastern box turtles can live up to 100 years, but many don't even make it through their first year because it's so tough to survive. So there are plenty of turtles that make great pets. The eastern box turtle is not one of them because it is technically on the endangered species list and therefore illegal to have as a pet in the state of Massachusetts. So they're awesome to admire outside, but not great to have as a pet indoors.
Great. Teddy may ask a question that we don't have an answer to.
Oh, interesting.
Do you know how many species of turtles there are in the world?
Oh my goodness. Total, I gotta tell you, I'm not 100% sure. The best I can do is tell you that, again, there are 4 species of box turtles and there are 6 subspecies of the common box turtle, one of which is the eastern box turtle. But I'm afraid I don't know how many turtles there are total. That sounds like an awesome project for you to look up when we're done. And I'd love for you to let us know because that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Tilly is on the move. I love it.
All right, so I think we're wrapping up on questions, but maybe we have some friends who might be just joining us. Can you just repeat who we met and a little bit about her?
Absolutely. So again, this is Tilly. She is an eastern box turtle, and she just turned 17 years old this February. So eastern box turtles can live in a huge range in the United States of America, from southern Maine.
You can just let her.
Okay, from southern Maine to northern Florida and all the way west towards even Kentucky, or trying to remember all the different states they can live in. Basically halfway through. So if you draw a line up from Texas halfway through the country, they can live basically east of that line. So they are found all over. They're very small. They range between 4.5 to 6 inches, 1 to 2 pounds. Small but mighty.
And our friend Rebecca has one last question, which comes up every time. Does she have a favorite keeper?
Does she have a favorite keeper? Well, I certainly wish that I could say that I am her favorite keeper. She is one of my very favorite animals in the whole wide world. But in interest of being fair, I think she loves all of her keepers, or just anybody who feeds her mealworms. So, you know.
All right, so we're going to actually let Tilly do a little enrichment. She likes to
digging.
climb around and dig in the leaves. So
see that camouflage in action.
Yeah, after we finish our keeper chat, we're actually going to let her stay out in Nature Play for a minute to get some enrichment. It's such a beautiful day. The sunshine is good for her, good for all of us. So we want to thank you for joining us today for our keeper chat with Tilly and Sarah. We are here every day at 11 to share our animals with you. We wish we could see you in person, but are so happy to be able to connect with you virtually during this time. Thank you to anyone who has made some donations to the Buttonwood Park Zoological Society today. We really appreciate your support to our emergency fund. Unfortunately, all of our money comes through programming and visitation to the zoo. So right now, your donations are what are going to allow us to keep offering these great virtual programs. So thank you for that. I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you are just joining us, as always, you can watch this when it is posted back on the page in completion and on YouTube. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Sarah. Thank you.
Bye.